And we're hi and welcome. Thank you, Janet, for being able to and make yourself available for this interview. How are you doing?
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. And you?
I'm doing well, doing well. I'm joining you from sunny Johannesburg,
That's it.
which is which is a bit envious from the not so sunny Lancaster.
Yeah.
But really, we're here to sort of just give an insight in terms of what you do in the leadership space, and just gather some of your insights around things that could help the manager who leads. And I know you're definitely a strong proponent in that space in what you do. So share a little bit about who you are and what you do in that space.
Fantastic. So I'm going to take a liberty and I'm going to start with something slightly poetic, if I may, Steve.
Absolutely.
But hopefully it's a really good introduction. So I want to say right up front, leaders matter. Our world feels like tensioned tectonic plates teetering on the verge of slipping. We're in a storm of radical societal transformation, living in the destructive path of complex, wicked problems. We're wrestling the massive waves of technological transformation and digitalization. And we're living in the roiling wake of the pandemic. And this is the context in which people are leading. I absolutely love your title of your podcast. I love the fact that you're talking about managers who lead. And I think it's so important that we understand the distinctions between those two elements. And you and I spoke about this briefly, so I'm going to quickly just jump back into something we said before. So we need to understand the distinction, but we also need to understand that anybody in a position of leader or manager has to do both. And I said to you, Steve, that my distinction is that management is about the management of stuff. It's the management of the non-human resources. It's harnessing those resources to make stuff happen. Leadership is all about the people. And I think you really are emphasizing that. And I just wanted to kind of add that endorsement. We make such a big deal about what is the difference. And we think some people are managers and some people are leaders. We have to be doing both. So I'm passionate about leadership. I believe so much that leadership really, really, really matters. Just going back to what I was saying just now, there is this incredible, challenging world that we are dealing with, and that our people are dealing with, the people in our teams. And somehow a leader has to make extraordinary things happen, not just for the organizations in which they lead, but also for the people in the teams that they lead. And I think for me, that's maybe one of the really first, most important things for us to say. You know, Stephen Covey years ago talked about the importance of the win-win. And we need as leaders to be effecting wins for the organization. But if we can at the same time effect wins for the people who are creating those wins for the organization, then we're already on the path towards optimal engagement and optimal satisfaction for the people who are working in our organizations. How's that for a kickoff?
That is
Okay.
fantastic. That is fantastic. That was very poetic and lots of alliteration. I couldn't even. I'll have to watch that again on the replay. But
I
but
have
I
a
mean
video.
there you go. But the point that you made definitely is that, I mean, it's a couple of really key distinctions. Is that leaders do matter, and this sounds kind of trite and a bit cynical, that sometimes leaders think they only matter to themselves. You know,
Oh,
the higher position of leadership sort of could create that sort of divide in an organization. No one goes into the C-suite, and no, and if you've got
no.
a C in your name, then it's a whole different ball game. When in actual fact, the mattering of a leader is to, like you said, the organization, because they're in that
Yeah.
position of
Yeah.
affecting where
Yeah.
the boat goes. but also to the people on the boat. Because if you don't look after the people on the boat, then you're not going, even if you point it in the right direction, you're not going to get there, you know,
100%.
without a cost. And you
Yeah.
also mentioned the distinction between the management of things and leading of people, which I think is really useful. And we flip flop between the two, like you say. We're always in a flux of leading and managing across the
100%.
organization. So I think one of the themes with a lot of my guests is that we are breaking down that kind of stigma or myth around one type of person being one thing and another type of person being another, whereby
100%.
even if you don't own, even if you're not in an organization, even if you're, you're a solopreneur, you're self-employed, you're managing your household, manage you manage the things in your household, but you lead the people in your household.
Right.
So it really does come across everywhere. So
Yeah.
so what do you you mentioned a lot of things around the like the rolling tide of the pandemic, which is a really interesting way of doing it. It's the after wave. It's the
Yeah.
aftershocks of
Yeah.
it, and we're still feeling them years later.
Yeah.
And it's not an excuse. It's a way of life now post pandemic.
Yes.
But where do you see the hope, and where do you see the work that needs to be done to encourage managers to lead?
Great question. So I think first of all, maybe what I want to just pick up on in terms of,
Hmm.
that roiling wake of the pandemic, it's the what comes after, is one of the challenges that all leaders face is the notion of complexity.
Mm.
The systems in which we work are not simple. They are not linear. There are some that are, but especially when it comes to leadership, we are dealing with complex challenges. And that's complex not just within the context of the now, but there's a complexity that rolls out into the future. There's a complexity that goes back into the past. So just to use the pandemic as an example, because we can get a bit hung up on it, but just to use that as an example, we've had this massive event that literally touched almost every single part of the global system. And we are still feeling the after effects of that massive event, economically, socially, from a health perspective. There are impacts that are going to ripple out probably for decades to come after that event. I'm a South African, and I'm going to put this out there. I grew up in the context of apartheid, which was a diabolically wicked system. Just going to put that out there. But what's his name? Nearly 40 years after the end of apartheid, we are still feeling the after effects of decisions that were taken 100 years ago that were stupid. And we're feeling those effects. So I think maybe just to highlight the fact that one of the biggest challenges, I think, for leaders is operating within the environment of complexity. They cannot make a single decision without knowing that it's going to have a ripple effect, both in the people that they're leading immediately, in the teams, in the broader organization, and ultimately out into society. And maybe just to go one step further, Steve, I talk about 3 types of challenge. Complexity is one of them. I studied wicked problems. That's why wicked problems comes up a lot. But the environment in which we're operating poses 3 great challenges to us. One is complexity. The second is change. And the third is conflict. And conflict doesn't necessarily mean World War III. It means that there are gaps, there are differences, there are alternative perspectives, there's diversity in our world. And so all 3 of these are absolutely vital to progress. But they also pose enormous challenges to every single one of us. So
Right.
I didn't answer your question directly, but hopefully I gave you something a little bit more interesting.
Yes. Well, yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting to think that we live in a society that is very fast,
Yeah.
and you know, we talked about instant gratification and the lack of it, you know, our attention span getting shorter and shorter all the time. But there are things, like you said, the complexities. There are things that are underlying that are become systemic, and when they become systemic, they hang around for a long time. I
Yeah.
don't care if your attention span dropped from 1 minute to 30 seconds in the last 5 years. You just mentioned, you know, the apartheid system in South Africa, and I've been to Johannesburg. I went to Johannesburg in 1983,
Yeah.
and it was technically, it was called petty apartheid then. It was, the labels were still hanging around,
Yep.
but it's in the hearts and the minds of a society, and it does take it. It's a generational shift, and so we see that there's impacts that we can't be complacent about, that take time. And like you said, we are navigating that complexity in the context of what we're trying to do today. We're trying to build a business. We're trying to make some money. We're trying to look after our families, or look after the society. And we want things to happen quickly. But we have to understand that, like you said, there's a ripple effect. And I think what you said did answer in a little bit, because understanding that the complexity is there gives us a reality check in terms of what we're dealing with. And then we can correctly place our hope into the processes that we're going to introduce.
Yes.
It's no point being naive and sort of say, well, I hope it's okay, when you're actually on the precipice of disaster. If you take a reality check in terms of what's going on, then that's a lot better place to be in.
Yes.
And then also, in complexity, talk about a little bit in terms of how we articulate that. Because if we're leading people, or we aspire to lead people, then the challenge is to get our thoughts, ideas, impressions from what we see them to be into people that need to sort of connect with that goal or that vision or that objective or that purpose.
100%.
So how do we,
Yes.
what can we do about that communication element?
So I love the fact that you use the word articulate, because it's very much part of my astute leader approach. So thank you for that introduction. I'm going to use that. I think just before I go into the elements of astute leading that I think are so important, just to pick up on one other thing that we were talking about just now, and that is that in the aftermath of anything significant, and even the not so significant things, we don't know what people are carrying when they come back into the workplace.
It's true.
I had a little thing, you know, we talked for a long time about going back or coming back. And I was talking about who's coming back, because that was the big debate. You know, are we bringing back half the workforce? Are we bringing back a quarter of the workforce? Far more important question is, who are the people who are coming back? Who are the people who walk in every single day? What are they bringing with them? How have their mindsets shifted? What are their beliefs that drive the way that they respond to different situations? So with that in mind, these are the people we lead. You invited the exploration of astute leading. I believe that leadership as a concept has fundamentally shifted from the way that it was functioning 100 years ago to what it is today. And there are a number of reasons why. Radical societal transformation is one of them. We just don't believe the same things that we believed 100 years ago. The apartheid system fell because we no longer believed that that was just. We no longer believe that discrimination on a whole lot of levels is just. Society no longer believes that. And so that's changed a lot of the ways that we show up. You even alluded earlier, Steve, to sort of, you know, the hierarchical layers. I try to not use language that entrenches patriarchal, hierarchical systems, because they actually have to, in many respects, be minimized at least, and hopefully in some places actually disbanded. But if we keep using that language, if we keep talking about leaders and followers, we will entrench leadership and followership. And I'm not convinced that that's a good idea. Subject for another day. So there are 4 things that I think are really 4 critical competencies that leaders need to develop if they're going to work effectively with people. The first one is articulate influence. So there's an A and an I for each of these.
Oh, right.
So influence is about how do we move people? How do we move people to do something that is important to get done? How do we move people to enroll in something without power? One of the critical key to that is being articulate and articulating the systems. And that's really all about messaging and storying. So how do we story the strategy? How do we message what people mean to us? And what is in it for them? Just a couple of little examples of some of the techniques that I think are important in terms of influence. The second critical competency for leaders in the 21st century is the ability to think. And I call that insight, be aware. And you alluded, we were talking just now about complexity. One of the problems is, honestly, we haven't taught people to think. A patriarchal system doesn't teach people to think.
It's true.
It teaches people to obey. It teaches people to conform. In a complex world like we're living in right now, we have to enable people to be making decisions. And in order to do that, we have to help them to understand complexity, to scenario plan, to be able to think critically. So that for me is the second big chunk of ability that a leader has to have. They first will have to be able to think, and then they have to be able to help other people to think. Third aspect, or third module actually of our Astute Leader program is something we really should have mastered a long time ago, and we haven't. And that is interdependent adult relationships. Adult interdependence. And here we talk about things like our ability to team, to work effectively with team dynamics, our ability to collaborate and to foster effective collaborations between people. Those are just some of the concepts, but it also goes down to basic stuff like, for heaven's sake, how do you create a safe environment where people will show up willing to speak the truth, willing to make suggestions because they feel safe enough to do that. I have to say, I don't like the term psychological safety. You will hear a lot of me saying these kind of things. I don't like the term. I far prefer the term psychological generativity, because generativity is about creation. I don't just want to make people feel safe. I want to create an environment in which they can be creative and generative, where they can help make stuff better. So that's number 3. So articulate influence, awareness and insight, adult interdependence, and the last one, and this is the one that unfortunately so many organizations put first, and managers are really expected to deliver on this, and that is adept implementation. And a lot of our implementation methodologies and thinking is quite archaic. We need to, again, come into the 21st century. And I hate to say it, but especially in corporates, they're still doing things the way they were done 100 years ago. That's why these smart, tech-savvy young entrepreneurs are taking their spaces and, getting, I have a little term, but I can't remember it offhand. But they're taking their podiums. They're taking their crowns because they're doing implementation in a different way. And leaders who managers who lead, have to be able to do all 4 of those things. And they have to be able to do them really, really well. And that obviously is challenging. I do believe it can be learned. I do believe that we can, if we start with who leaders are, not what they do. So leadership is fundamentally about being, because out of the being will flow great doing.
Yeah, we're definitely on the same page around the idea of it's becoming something as opposed to just falling into the title and then doing the actions, because
Yeah, yeah,
it's hollow. It's hollow if it's not, if it's going to be inauthentic if you're
yeah.
just following the steps. And like you've said, we've mentioned the complexities of systems that have been in place that no longer serve society, but have been entrenched in society to the point where we don't even realize that they're still there. And we can take that down all sorts of rabbit holes. Societally,
Yes.
politically, and generatively in terms of generational
Yeah,
changes. But I
yeah.
do like I do like the four AI hooks in terms of where they go. And
Yeah.
something you said, which I think is going to be on a T-shirt one day, which was obey, don't think, which is the old mantra in terms of, I mean, that ties into education, whereby
Yeah.
you're stuck in a room. The shift from in-person training, teaching to online and more explorative ways of getting information into someone's head, and then not only getting the information in there, but actually having them do something with it. We need
Yeah.
less information in our heads these days because we can carry it around on our phones and on our devices, and it's in the ether on the internet. So the challenge now becomes not the lack of information, but the utilization of what you know, not
Yeah.
just the acquisition of knowing it.
100%.
So, like you said, in this space, it can be sometimes being feels like an innate quality that someone has, and we're both in that education coaching
Yeah.
space are here to say that you can't dismiss innate ability. If you're 6'5", you're
Yes.
probably going to be a better volleyball player or basketball player than someone
For
who's,
me.
yeah. But notwithstanding that, there are elements to what we do that can be acquired, and skills that can be learned so that we can leverage, against that innate ability. And when we see someone who does something well, sometimes it's easy to kind of sort of say, oh, they're a natural born leader, which really is, I don't know anyone who's been naturally born. And I think a lot of autobiographies of famous leaders show that they were far from naturally gifted in terms of what they did. A circumstance showed up, a challenge was in front of them. They had a guide or a mentor in the space that either showed them the way or showed them the need to step into that space, and they took courageous action. And really and history always favors the victor, right? So you only hear the stories of the people that did well.
Yeah.
So
I
we
love
get
that
a
you talk about courageous action. I actually, as you were talking, I wrote down courage. And I think that often that is one of the most powerful forces is just courage.
yeah.
So I just wanted to pick up on that. But coming back to what you're saying about innate abilities, Steve, that I work a lot with the Clifton Strengths tool. I have been coaching with that tool for 17 years. So I really, really do love it. I think it is a very, very powerful tool. What I've learned coaching people over all those years is that the fact that you have a raw innate ability, number one, doesn't mean that you're using it effectively.
It's true.
So I always talk about the fact that your strengths can add value, but they can also make you vulnerable. And so part of leadership growth is learning to lead yourself, learning to lead those vulnerabilities. I actually have a little saying that I share with all of my coachees. If you do not lead this strength, it is the strongest part of who you are. It will lead you. And that is a truth. So sometimes, I'll give you an example. There's a strength called command. And people with command literally can be like a regimental sergeant major. They like to call the shots, and they like to make sure that things are done with clarity. That's the strength that they bring. If a building's burning down, you want somebody with command, because they will tell everybody exactly what to do. And there'll be no messing around. There'll be a straight, direct answer. Works in the military. Okay. But we don't always need that form of leadership. And sometimes I talk to my clients who have command, and I say, you know what? Sometimes it just needs to be put away in the cupboard. Use the other ones because they're of more value. Pull that one out when it's needed. So part of it is learning to lead that, and then also learning to understand how to use the strengths that we do have most effectively. I'll give you another quick little example. There's a strength called achiever. And achievers are unbelievably good at getting stuff done. They tick their list, they make their list and tick their list off every single day. Da, 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 done, done, done. And because of that, they're very, very efficient. The vulnerability of that is that they don't always do everything thoroughly. They do it sufficiently so they can tick it off, but they get a hang of a lot done, and they hit goals. But achievers, so when you bring that achiever energy to a conversation, not to a task, as a leader, you need to learn to manage that and to figure out, or to lead it, to figure out how to be a little less efficient and maybe a little bit deeper and a little bit more meaningful. So I don't think there's any profile that cannot lead. I think, however, the development and maturity definitely help. There are a whole bunch of other things that I'll add to that, but let's just talk for the moment about development and maturity. I don't believe that people are born leaders. And to pick up on something you said right at the beginning of the conversation, something I learned many, many years ago, sitting in a colleague's office with 10 minutes to spare, I pulled a book off the shelf, opened the book I was reading because I was bored. So I was reading this book, and I only got through the first page. But on the first page, this author said, and I wish I knew what the book was, I don't, said, two people sitting alone in a room, not talking to each other, will have an impact on each other. Every single one of us has influence. We do all lead. The mandate and the challenge is to do that with intentionality in such a way that we have more positive impact.
That's cool. That's powerful. It's a lot to there's a lot to unpack there, and I think this discussion. I'm wondering what strength I'm leaning on right now to answer your question, because there's a part of me that says this is good stuff, and people who are listening, who are joining us live or joining us on the replay, are hearing these two people talk about all of these nuances around leading and leadership, and managing and leaders, and we say the two things not to create the division between them, but to actually understand there are two equally valid elements or components to how we operate in the world. And like you said, there are, like the Clifton strengths, there are lots of facets of strengths that we bring. So it's not a matter of competing one strength against another, as much as understanding how they move between each other and how you can lean on one in certain circumstances and another in a different one. So all that to say, there's a lot to kind of be aware of in this discussion, and I'm a kind of part of me is a kind of a tips guy. I'm in IT for a long time, and it's like, okay, I've got the theory now. Give me something I can go away and do on this machine or do on this system. So I'm very tips driven in that respect. But in a coaching space, it is
Yep.
much more about man, uh, managing how people are being, not managing what they're doing. And the tip can feel like, this is what I want you to go away and do. You've heard Janet du Preez talk about X, Y, and Z. You've heard Steve Wright mention this. Now go and do these three things and you will be a better X.
Yes.
That's true. At the same time, I invite the audience to think more deeply around the last statement you just mentioned about two people being in a room saying nothing and having an influence. It's because they're both being and they're not using words to express who they are.
Yeah.
And that is an underlying strength that we often don't tap into. And I would argue that if you're in a position of influence, and influence is a nice way of saying leading, because sometimes influence is something that you may not even be aware that you're doing.
Yeah.
As opposed to leading tends to be a container that says, okay, you're in this box, you're leading, show people that you're leading, show other leaders that you're leading, and show the followers that you are leading them. Whereas if you're in a space of influence, you can literally be walking down the street with a smile on your face and you influence a dozen people that walk by you without you even knowing that you did it. So I think if there was a tip to take away from this discussion, if anything, is to think deeply on the complexities because they are there.
Yeah.
I would pull out the realities of the complexity. And there's techniques for that. Simplify things.
Yeah.
Don't over engineer.
Yeah.
Look for the simple path in something. Break it down so that you've got it down to its essential elements. And in that space, slow down so that you can actually be, rather than get caught into the automatic loop of seeing something and doing something. Maybe you should see something, stop, make sure it's real, give it context,
Yeah.
and then just be in that space where then you can think about your influence as opposed to your leadership. And you've got techniques and you've got strategies with regards to understanding where you are in terms of strengths, the strengths builder opportunities. And we've given you kind of a framework in terms of the astute leadership is an awesome framework in which you can rest and think about the four AIs that came up. So I think there is definitely some elements that we can take away from this, but I think the overarching thing is think about being, because that influences the doing.
100%.
Yeah.
Can I say three last things?
Yep. Sure.
So, it felt like that was a bit of a wrap up, but I'm going to quickly just.
Yep.
The
Yep.
first
No.
thing is, years ago, I actually started developing a program, and I've never delivered it, but it was called Centerpoint, and it was specifically designed and developed for mid-level managers. So, your managers who lead, and it's all still there. We can pull it out anytime. But the image that I used, I love imagery. The image that I used for that program was that of a tornado. And I do think, and this is a very important recognition of the people who listen into this podcast, is that very often mid-level managers feel like they literally are in the middle of a tornado because they have these opposing forces, top and bottom, all the time. Coming from the top, they're expected to deliver results. That's often all that matters. And they have to do that. And that often is the management piece. But they have to do that with people that they lead. And so just to kind of highlight that and say, your job is tough. And it's normal to feel overwhelmed and exhausted and all those kind of things. But there are ways of kind of navigating that. And then if I had to give you just two tips, and they're lots, I've got many, 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 but two. Number one, I think the most important skill for any leader is the ability to listen.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
And then the flip side of this, and this is part of the articulate influence, tying into what you just said, Steve, everything speaks.
Mm.
The reason that we are influential, whether or not we open our mouths, is because every choice that we make says something. It says something about us, it says something about the system, and probably most importantly, it says something about the people, or to the people that we are influencing. And we desperately have to be very intentional about the messages that we are conveying.
I'm leaving a long silence on purpose because I want that to really sink in. I just got that's another I say t-shirt, but I say t-shirt logo because it's something that you see quickly and stays with you longer than the period that you saw it. Everything speaks. So we have to lean into the strength of listening because everything is speaking. That's powerful. I think that's a great title. I've got things pinging around me, but I'm not sure if they're going to come through on the recording. But obviously we're going live here, and I may have some things pinging and dinging, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Everything speaks, so I'm listening. But that's powerful. And I'm sort of landing the plane a little bit here, but is there anything? Yeah, I want that to resonate. I think that's the title. Everything speaks, because it really does wrap all of our discussion around that. In terms of that power. Is there any final thoughts in terms of what you do? How can people reach you and find out more about what you do in the Astute Leadership?
Fantastic, Steve. I presume that you can give people links and I'll send those on to you. I've got some lovely YouTube videos. I've got a website. I have a LinkedIn profile. I'll send all of that to you.
Okay.
And yes, I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I love the idea of travel. So no place is too far away. But I also do a lot of my work online. So I'm very, very accessible. And always delighted to speak, and especially to talk about and to honestly help leaders get better.
Yes. Yeah.
It's my mission in life. Maximize their impact.
Yeah. That's perfect. And like I said, you've come through a political and societal change in where you are in the world, and you've seen the need for powerful in a sense of influential, courageous, authentic leadership. And
sorry, I have to say one more thing.
Go for it.
Okay. So this is my thing that one of the things I am most passionate about. This is my manifesto. Is just a message to everybody: watch Africa. This is the most extraordinary, amazing, incredible continent. Please come and buy what Africa has to sell.
Amen.
I am surrounded by unbelievably resourceful, intelligent, creative, innovative, amazing people. Amen. Watch Africa.
Amen. Amen. I'm going to end it there because this is. I don't want to take away from the moment, and that's a powerful place to land in terms of things having an influence, everything speaking, and just showcasing the continent, because there's a lot of good things coming out of
incredible
the center of the earth. So I definitely appreciate that. Janet, thank you so much for your time. I hope the viewers and listeners enjoyed our discussion here. and got some takeaways. I certainly did. I've got some notes here that are definitely going to resonate, and I'll get this this interview and discussion out there onto the various channels, and then we'll get together real soon. So thank you so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciated the invitation.
All right, that's great. Thank you.